The award-winning American Airlines Advantage program rewards more than travel. It takes your whole life to new heights. Earn miles when you fly, as well as with thousands of your favorite brands. And then redeem those miles for flights, upgrades, and experiences worldwide. Advantage members also enjoy earlier boarding and free high-speed Wi-Fi in flight. Join for free and start earning towards your next adventure at aa.com/Spotify.
The Hulu original series, Furious, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
There are 3 victims we know of. The suspect is female, white, late 20s.
Female serial killers
Kill for power, control. I believe there's a deeper motivation here.
You have no idea who you're dealing with, and you are going to end up dead.
I've been waiting for you.
Watch the Hulu original series, Furious, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+. For bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the True Crime with Caitlyn podcast. I am your host Caitlyn, and today I'm going to tell you all about the case of a young boy who came from an everyday, ordinary, happy family. He had what many people would consider a very comfortable life, along with a mother whom absolutely adored him. So, how did he end up committing a murder so heinous that he was dubbed Devil Child? This is the murder of Jackie Bartlam. Today's case takes place in Ireland, Nottingham. This is where on the 11th of November 1996, Daniel Bartlam was born. His parents being Jacqueline, who went by the name Jackie, and Adrian Bartlam. They got married in 2000. Growing up, Daniel had what could be considered quite a privileged life. He was being raised within a middle-class family with both of his parents who absolutely doted on him and showered him in attention. He lived in a beautiful home in a nice part of the town. He went to private school and he got almost everything that he wanted. When he was 9 years old, Daniel had to adjust to the first proper big change in his life, and that was the birth of his younger brother. Suddenly, there was someone else in his home and who he had to share Jackie and Adrian with. Daniel was no longer their number one sole priority. Their love, care, affection and attention all had to be shared between both of the children, but this obviously didn't mean that they loved Daniel any less. Shortly thereafter came the next big change, and experts would say that this is what the life-changing event was in Daniel's life. We all get them, and in this case, that was his parents' separation. Jackie and Adrian's marriage had come to an end. Whatever issues or problems they were dealing with, they weren't able to overcome, and they split up in 2005. As a result of the divorce, Daniel's life was almost upheaved. They had to move house, so suddenly he wasn't living in a two-parent, two-wage household, so Jackie couldn't afford to send him to private school anymore. He was taken out and put into a nearby regular comprehensive school, which Jackie would have thoroughly researched, making sure that it was the best one for her son. She wasn't the type to just pop him in anywhere and say that'll do. Daniel was never able to adjust or settle in this new regular school, partly because he didn't want to. He had the mentality that he was better than everyone else in there, so he didn't make any effort at all to try and make friends, and so soon he became the target of bullies. Even outside of school, 14-year-old Daniel didn't really have any friends. He would spend most, if not all of his free time cooped up in his bedroom, curtains pulled closed, watching his telly or on the computer. He was really into sci-fi stuff, so he liked Doctor Who and Star Wars, for example, but he was also into very graphic things too. He would watch gory, violent horror movies on repeat for hours and hours on end. He played 18 plus video games, and on YouTube or something, he would watch clips from different TV shows depicting death, murder, and violence. He was absolutely enamored by it. Daniel actually had his own YouTube channel where he would post an array of different sorts of videos. Some of them he was just talking to the camera. On one of them, he's very excited about sharing that he got a new iMac. He would post other computer related stuff. He was really switched on when it came to that. By the time he was 12, he was already able to completely fix a broken laptop. But also on his YouTube channel, he would upload compilations that he had made. For example, he uploaded a video which was centering around his favourite moments from Coronation Street, only when you watch the video, it is solely scenes that show violence. That is the mentality that he was forming, shaping. This is what he was living and breathing day in and day out. In May 2008, Jackie would go on a well-deserved night out when she met a man named Simon Matters. Simon had also gone through a separation from his long-term ex-partner, and so he knew what Jackie was going through. They could relate to each other, they could listen to each other. Simon recalled being drawn to Jackie because of how caring she was. She truly took an interest in people, she was genuine, she was loving, some describing her as an all-round wonderful woman. Simon found this very alluring and attractive about her, and after getting to know each other, the two began dating. When Jackie introduced her sons to Simon, Daniel was very indifferent towards him. He didn't necessarily hate or embrace him. Simon was just there. Simon in turn, though, liked Jackie's boys. He tried to implement themselves in their life in a positive and natural way, not forcing anything, pushing anything, or rushing anything at all. But with Simon spending more time with the family, he got an inside look to just how poorly Daniel treated his mother. Daniel would instigate arguments with Jackie, getting right up in her face, nose to nose, screaming, shouting and swearing at her. He would put his fists up at her and he would punch and kick the walls. On one occasion, it got so serious that Simon actually had to intervene. On one occasion, Jackie and Simon were going through Jackie's house, just doing a bit of cleaning and decluttering, when they discovered some alarming things inside of Daniel's bedroom. So you know those like big plastic boxes that you can keep under your bed, like storage ones? Well, Daniel had some of those too, only instead of being filled with bed sheets and stuff like that, his were filled with urine. Urine. He had been weeing in the boxes and then kept it hidden under his bed for however long. If that wasn't disgusting enough, he also had towels hidden under his bed which had feces, dried and crusting on them. Poo. He had been pooing and wiping himself on the towels and then leaving them in his room. I cannot imagine the stench of that boy's room during a hot day. What was his motivation behind this? Was this another act of defiance against Jackie, Daniel making at least one room inside of her home absolutely minging? Or was it because he didn't want to leave whatever he was watching or doing to walk probably 10 steps to his ensuite to go to the toilet? He didn't even have to physically leave his bedroom, but instead he was going in boxes and on towels. Chillingly, the couple would also find a bag which had been filled with Jackie's underwear. Daniel had been stealing his mum's knickers and hiding them in his bedroom, but again, what was his motivation for this? Experts don't believe that there was a sexual motive behind it, but it had actually gotten so bad that Jackie started wondering where all of her underwear were going. She probably thought that the washing machine was eating some of them. But it wasn't. Daniel was keeping them inside of his room. Young Daniel Bartlam was a very angry boy, and this escalated the more control he felt like he was losing. After about 3-ish years of dating, Jackie and Simon wanted to each sell their own houses and buy a bigger and nicer one together, officially moving in with one another. And Daniel made this process the most awkward, stressful thing ever, and house buying in general is stressful anyways. Jackie and Simon would see a house that they'd like, they'd go and view it, and Daniel would be like, nah, not this one, I don't like it. And that was enough for Jackie. She wasn't blind, she could see that all of the big changes over the last few years had deeply affected her son. That's why, when he did kick off and scream at her, she would more often than not just bite her tongue. It was easier than getting into an argument and making things worse. This also went for when Daniel was being badly behaved or purposefully doing things that he knew would get him wrong. Better to just let it be and let it go over our head than cause an argument, which could result in destruction. So going back to when they discovered all of that in his bedroom, the boxes full of wheat, the dirty towels and her underwear, nothing was said to Daniel because it was easier. He was allowed to confine himself into his bedroom because asking him to spend time with them, to engage with his family, would just cause an argument. Going back to the whole house situation, Jackie wasn't going to force Daniel to move somewhere that he didn't like or somewhere where he thought he was going to be uncomfortable. She really cared and valued his thoughts and opinions on things, what he had to say, how he felt, and she took everything that he said incredibly seriously. If he didn't like a house or didn't like an area, that was it. She wasn't going to move there. It's been theorised that Daniel was this way, more so towards Jackie, because he was angry about the divorce. He felt that after that, his life had went downhill. It had so quickly changed and he was powerless to stop it. Jackie was the parent that he lived with, that he saw more of, and so she got the brunt of his anger, which day by day was getting worse. When he was 13 years old, after an argument with Jackie, Daniel ran out of their house and ran away. Jackie, Simon, neighbours and friends were all out in the streets searching for Daniel, absolutely worried sick. He was discovered by police some hours later within proximity to his old family home, which aligns with the belief that he just wanted to go back to his old life. Daniel would be returned home and then nothing else was said on it. No need to bring it up because it might happen again or it might stir up an argument. As time began to go on, Daniel started demonstrating more unusual behaviour in school. He had started speaking to a counsellor whom he had told that he had voices in his head, that his school tie wrapped around his neck was alive. He had named it Fred, and according to Daniel, Fred had made threats towards him. Following these claims, Daniel was taken to the doctor. He spent a few sessions with a referred therapist, but he exhibited no signs of mental illness, and that was that. It was chalked up to him attention seeking. The longer that Daniel Bartlam was cooped up in his dark, dirty, stuffy bedroom, the more he began planning to murder his mother, Jacqueline. His hatred and anger towards her had reached a boiling point for him. He had detached himself away from his family, not even sitting with them to eat their tea on a night time. He would take his plate up to his bedroom and eat in there while everyone else was downstairs sat at the table together. And he chose to go upstairs alone. Daniel was digesting and taking in so much of the gory content from all of the horror movies he was watching, the true crime documentaries, the games that he was playing, even the weeknight soaps that he had constantly on repeat. He had fully immersed himself within that, and in his mind, the mind of a young boy with no friends, no social life, isolated from his family, and unhappy in every single environment that he was in, the line between fiction and reality started to blur. He did direct some of this creatively. Like I said, he had his own YouTube channel where he would direct and edit videos, but he would also write screenplays and short stories. both of which he would proudly read to Jackie and Simon. These stories included Daniel himself as a main character, and in the stories, he would sometimes murder children, which left Jackie and Simon alarmed but not exactly concerned. They just thought that this was stemming from his love of horror movies. All of his stories contained graphic, brutal violence, just as his artwork did. He would draw the disturbing things that he saw in his mind. After watching a specific storyline on Coronation Street, the weeknight soap, Daniel became inspired about what he was watching. To him, it was like a light bulb moment, because that was how he was going to do it. That was how he was going to murder his mother. He wanted to reenact it, and so he began his evil plan. It was Easter weekend in April 2011. Simon Matters was away in Yorkshire for work, and so he and Jackie were mainly keeping in touch by sending the odd text message throughout the day. Neither of them were constant texters. Jackie had told Simon that on that day, this was the 24th, they had had a pretty nice day. She and the boys had been to her mother's house where they had a nice meal together, and then Daniel was back at home in his bedroom, of course, watching the Saw movies back to back, like a movie marathon. When Simon reached out to Jackie the next day and didn't hear back from her, initially he didn't worry. It was Easter, so maybe she was just preoccupied with her sons. So Simon started doing what many of us would do today and just started scrolling through his phone when he came across a news article and his stomach dropped. He was reading about a fatal house fire back in Nottingham, a house on Georgia Drive, which is where Jackie lived. He later said that in this very moment, he knew in his gut that the article was referring to Jackie's house, and deep, deep down, he knew who was responsible. Daniel. He raced from Yorkshire, and throughout the 90-ish minute drive, he is trying repeatedly to reach Jackie, but getting no response. I honestly don't know how he managed to do that drive, because his mind was probably hitting 90, doing overtime. When he eventually arrived at Georgia Drive, he was taken aback to see the condition of Jackie's home. It had been ripped apart by the flames. A window had even been blown out. He went up to one of the policemen at the scene and identified himself, and that is when he was told the heartbreaking news that there had not only been a fire, but someone hadn't survived it. Firemen who arrived to A, put the fire out, and B, to investigate it, found an almost completely incinerated body belonging to who appeared to be an adult woman. She was found in a bedroom upstairs and had been engulfed by the ferocious fire. What remained of the woman was taken for a post-mortem exam, and her dental records identified her as 47-year-old Jacqueline Bartlam, beloved, devoted mother of two, and a woman who was loved by many. Miraculously, both of Jackie's sons and the family dog had managed to escape the fire completely unscathed, and that was all down to the bravery of Daniel. He had actually got his little brother out of the burning house and then went back inside to retrieve the family dog before banging up a neighbour crying out for help. The firemen who were called to the scene quickly determined that this was no accidental fire. The fire had begun in Jackie's bedroom, and whoever had set it had used an accelerant, dousing Jackie's body and the room in petrol. Daniel was taken for an interview, and he told the police quite the story. He said that he had awoken during the night to go to the toilet. When he opened his bedroom door, he was taken aback by a strange masked man stood there. In a state of shock, Daniel reached to the floor, where there just so happened to be a hammer, and threw it towards this man who fled the house by jumping out of the window. Daniel then began his own cursory search of the house to check on everyone and make sure that everything was okay. And that is when he discovered his mother, Jackie, lay on her bed, having very obviously been brutally attacked, and that her body was on fire. This is when he went into protector mode, shaking his little brother awake, saving him and the dog, but he was unable to save his mother. Quite quickly from the off, detectives were looking sideways at Daniel. They weren't getting a good feeling about him. During Jackie's autopsy, alongside identifying her, the pathologist also determined that she didn't die as a result of the fire, from smoke inhalation or being burnt to death. She was dead before the fire had even started. She had died after sustaining at least 8 strikes to the head with a hammer. She had been bludgeoned to death, and the perpetrator had used the fire as a way to try and cover up their callous crime. Inside the burnt house, the firemen found 2 vital pieces of evidence. They found a claw hammer, which appeared to have been cleaned. However, forensic testing would later find traces of Jackie's blood. This hammer was consistent with her injuries. This claw hammer was the murder weapon. Alongside that, they also found another hammer. This was a club-style hammer, which was described as a red heron. That was put there by the killer to try and throw off the detectives, but they weren't that daft. Door-to-door inquiries were conducted through Georgia Drive to see if anyone heard anything, saw anything, knew anything, or even if they could back up Daniel's claims of an intruder. Was someone they didn't recognise lurking around the street? Were there any suspicious cars or anything like that? One of the neighbours said that on that night, in the very early hours of the 25th of April 2011, this is like 1 o'clock in the morning, they heard Jackie and Daniel in the middle of what sounded like a very fiery, angry argument. And this must have been quite the argument if it was so loud that it was heard by one of their neighbours. Sometime shortly after the argument, Daniel went out to the garden and he's still shouting and screaming on, and Jackie is heard telling him to go back into the house. He does, but just a couple of minutes later, Daniel once again creeps out of the house, making his way to the garden shed. He rummages around inside of there before creeping back into the house. Moments later, the neighbour heard the piercing screams of a woman. Despite this, however, for whatever reason, they didn't contact the police. Some of the most, in my opinion, disturbing and damning evidence that detectives were now uncovering against Daniel was his digital evidence. His search history on his computer showed that he had what was described as an unhealthy interest in the morbid. He would frequent websites, reading forums and articles, whatever, on how to get away with murder. In a deleted file, investigators were able to cover one of Daniel's stories/screenplays that he had written. He had wrote a detailed story about a character murdering his mother by bludgeoning her to death with a hammer and then setting fire to the body to cover up the crime scene, and that character got away with it by placing the blame on a false intruder, and that character was branded the hero. Are you noticing any similarities here? If not, the character who committed the murder in Daniel's story was named Daniel Bartlam, and the victim, Jackie. He had physically wrote a story about murdering his mother in precise detail, and what he wrote is exactly what ended up happening to her. He also had video clips saved in his computer from TV shows or whatever, where the victim had been murdered by means of a hammer and fire being included in the crimes. Just 2 days after the murder of Jackie Bartlam, her 14-year-old son Daniel was arrested on suspicion of her murder. For all the time and planning he had put into doing this, he was caught out within 48 hours. For weeks upon weeks, Daniel denied any involvement in his mother's murder and stuck to his story about the intruder, and so, without him confessing, detectives continued to build their case against him. While being held in a youth offenders unit, Daniel struggled to integrate, just as he had in school, only here he didn't have to keep his anger in check or on a leash, or so he thought. He would get into many arguments with the other children in the unit, sometimes them even escalating into physical fights, and on one occasion he was absolutely blinded with rage as he was being pulled away from another young girl who he was fighting. He screamed, quote, "I could kill her just like I killed my mum." This information was passed over to the police, who pulled him in for another interview. Maybe because now he had slipped up, he would be more willing to talk. Maybe he would be ready to tell the truth. He tried a little bit to continue with his false story. When he was presented with the evidence, for some things he had an answer, an explanation. When he was confronted about the disturbing story they had found in his deleted files, Daniel said he only used his and his mother's names because it was easy, not because he was planning on doing what he had written. Eventually, though, he began to crack under the pressure. His stories and lies were coming apart and away at the seams. And finally, he said he was ready to talk. He was finally ready to tell them the truth.
This episode is brought to you by Adobe Firefly, the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video generation. Built for today's creative process, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, and the timelines? Woo, yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Learn more at adobe.com/firefly.
Honey, what are you listening to?
Mom!
Your teen might not share everything with you, but teens share everything with each other. And certain everyday behaviors, like sharing food, drinks, or kisses, could mean sharing bacteria that can cause meningococcal disease, known as meningitis. Although meningitis is uncommon, about 1 in 10 who develop it will die. Ask your teen's doctor about missing meningitis vaccinations. Learn more at meningitis.com. Vaccination may not protect all recipients. Sponsored by GSK.
"14-year-old Daniel Bartlam admitted to killing his mother Jackie, but he said that this came off the back of him snapping. It wasn't planned, it wasn't premeditated, it was just in the moment. He simply snapped. Now this version is what Daniel claims happened, so I would take this with a pinch of salt. He said that himself and Jackie got into an argument over a pair of missing trainers. During the argument, Jackie allegedly called Daniel a, quote, fucking freak. With Daniel's history of being bullied, freak was a word that would immediately trigger him, and in this instance, it did exactly that. He said that upon hearing this, he was so angry that he went outside to the shed, retrieved the claw hammer, marched into Jackie's bedroom, and then repeatedly struck her all across her face, head, and skull with the hammer until he had killed her. He then began the process of trying to do something about her body, coming up with this pretty instantaneously, despite this being an unplanned killing. He would wrap up his mother's body in newspaper and doused her in petrol. Then he stopped. He decided that this was actually the perfect time to jump in the shower and freshen up. I don't doubt that he would have had a substantial amount of his mother's blood up his arms, on his face and his body because of the ferocity of bludgeoning her with the hammer. He wanted to get himself completely cleaned and freshened up, ready for the act that he was about to put on. After the shower, he proceeded to set Jackie's body on fire, and then we know what happened from here. It's interesting to me that he claims that this was an alleged spur of the moment, but the method he murdered Jackie and the attempt to conceal the murder were both ways that he had been fantasizing about, even wrote in graphic detail, and it just so happened to happen when Simon, Jackie's boyfriend, wasn't at the house. He was miles away in Yorkshire. Daniel Bartlam would plead not guilty to the murder of his mother, and so his trial began at Nottingham Crown Court in April 2012. His team, the defence, tried to paint Jackie as an emotionally neglectful mother, which didn't ring true to anyone who knew Jackie, but that's what his team were going with. When Daniel took the stand, he was asked if he had planned to kill his mother, which he said he didn't plan to kill her that night. This could be interpreted that he was planning to kill her, but not exactly on that day. Towards the end of the trial, Daniel turned to Simon Matters, sat in the gallery as support for Jackie, and he looked Simon in the eyes as he smirked and pulled his finger across his throat. A threat? An attempt at intimidation? Or a child who doesn't grasp the severity of the situation that he is in? At the end of the 2-week trial, the jury found Daniel Bartlam, then 15 years old, guilty of the murder of Jacqueline Bartlam, his own mother. Upon hearing the verdict, Daniel dropped his head in his hands and he looked like he was about to start crying. This being the only time that he had ever shown regret or remorse for what he had done. I don't think that those tears were for his actions or even for Jackie. I think that those tears were for himself. He would go on to be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years to serve, meaning he could be released by the time he's 30 with a full life ahead of him. It was reported that in 2024, Daniel was moved into an open prison to reflect his good behaviour. Now, 2 years later and 15 years since the murder, it's entirely possible that he is now a free man. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast so that you never miss a new upload. If you could leave me a 5-star review wherever you're listening, that would help me out so much and I would really appreciate that. You can find photos over on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you all for being here and I'll catch you all on the next one.